what do you think makes a good capital allocator, at least in the world of venture capital? And what do you think makes a good founder in the world of startups?
There's so many things, right? I mean, it's same what makes a good entrepreneur, like, and a good entrepreneur, obviously, it's a mile wide. On top of that, I think you need to be flexible enough to change your mind when you're wrong and to realize that you don't actually know what's going to happen. This is like the uncertainty thing, right? You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know how it's going to play out. And if you pretend you do and you're inflexible, then you're just going to go down some dead end. So you need to be able to say, like, not sure what's going to happen. I have a theory of what's going to happen and I'm going to pursue that. And when I find out it's not working or I'm wrong, then I'm going to change my course. Going full bore down one path, realizing that you may have to change direction at any time. It's not an easy thing for most people to do. And embracing the fact you really don't know what's going to happen.
Mhm.
So to me, that's like at the core of it. And I know that's not like a personality trait. It's just a way of thinking. And if you talk to a good entrepreneur, they do think that way, right? And you've talked to plenty of entrepreneurs. I think that's important as for a founder. You talk to a good entrepreneur and say like, well, here's what's going to happen. And you're like, actually that's wrong because of this. They'll be like, great, then here's what's going to happen. How wrong I often was. And I think that's true on the investor side too. And I think most investors don't get this, right? They're very certain of their opinions. This company is like in the right place. This market's going to be huge, et cetera. But of course, that's not how they run their businesses, right? Like nobody puts all their eggs in one basket. I mean, if you were sure of something, you'd put all your money in it. I mean, you're done, right? You found something that was a sure bet. I do think people need to be more conscious of the fact they can't predict the future. If you can't predict the future, then you have to invest somewhat differently than if you think you can, or even if you think you almost can. So there's some humility, I believe, that's probably necessary that a lot of investors don't seem to have.
Welcome to the Ageas podcast. Buckle up. This episode is brought to you by CardsBiz, a business card too good to give away. This episode is brought to you by Better Weight for Life, transformational weight loss aid, led by U.S. board-certified physicians, providing access to GLP-1 medications like Wegovy and Zepbound that are proven to help you lose weight and keep it off.
Hello, Jerry.
Hi, how are you?
Good. I'm good. I'm good. I have to say, well, besides the fact I'm a bit mumbling, and I'm very, very excited because it's like I don't know if you agree with this, but I kind of see you as an investor philosopher. Like there will be like the philosopher kings, where people who wielded both practical power and had philosophy about it. But you seem to be both a man of practice and a bit of philosophy, and I always kind of found that fascinating.
I'm like a philosopher peasant. Yes.
Well, whatever, whatever works. And you've had a very interesting kind of career and kind of experience. If it's like from an entrepreneur, an investor, a private investor. If I understood correctly, over 15 years of reportedly 50% IRR over many companies. But for people who don't know Jerry, how do you define yourself? Like, why should entrepreneurs care or shouldn't care about what you have to say?
So, well, they shouldn't care. No, I was technically an angel investor, but I call myself a venture capitalist. It was my job. I did it professionally. It's how I paid the bills for a long time. Gosh, almost 18 years, I guess. And then before that, I was a founder. I co-founded a company with two other people. We raised venture capital, et cetera. And before that, I was a venture capitalist at a big corporation in New York City. So I have been in the startup world, I guess my whole life, most of my life.
Yeah.
I took a short break in the middle to work for a couple of very large companies, which I hated. And then I taught entrepreneurship at Columbia University for about 15 years as well at the engineering school to engineers. And then I write. So I wrote a book. I write on the internet. I recently wrote an article for Colossus magazine about AI. So I guess if you want to know why people should care, I have a lot of opinions. I don't know. You don't have to believe me. So,
But I mean, at least you have gray hair. I mean, at least you have hair, but you have gray hair to show for it.
it is turning gray. Yes.
Fun. So I mean, maybe this is a bit far back, but do you remember like how you flipped from a builder to an investor, and why that made sense to you?
Yes. I mean, the first time it was a bit of an accident. The second time, so I had been a founder. We raised money and started a company. We built the company. We had revenue. We raised about 15 million in venture capital, which was a lot back then. This was 2000.
I mean, it's still absolutely a lot of money. I know people like you get desensitized when you see hundreds and trillions of dollars investments, but 50 million is a lot of money.
It's a lot of money for, yeah, I think so. We
Yeah,
weren't AI companies, um,
yeah.
but and it was 2005, so it was a lot of money then. Um, and then when we went out to raise more money, the board pushed me and my co-founders out. They put their own person in. They were looking for a different strategy, and which is fine, whatever. We could talk about that if you want, but the some of the people we had hired who were very entrepreneurial decided they didn't want to work for the new management.
Hmm.
It was much more command and control kind of management, and decided to leave and start companies. And they would leave and they would call me and say, "Hey, you raised a bunch of venture money. How do I do this? How
Hmm.
do I go about raising money?" And so I started helping them and putting my own money in. And at that point, after leaving the previous company, I was in an office of a venture capital friend of mine. He had an extra office, and I was sitting there, and every morning I'd write ideas on the whiteboard, and every afternoon I'd erase them all. And trying to find something to do. And I started putting money into my friends' companies of people who had worked for me, and I realized that had just been a much better investor than manager,
Hmm.
than entrepreneur. So yeah, I mean, I guess So I failed. I failed into venture capital from entrepreneurship. That's how
You
I look
filled
at it.
you filled up in a way. It's like
No,
that.
I don't think it's. I don't believe it's up. That's not how I think of it. I really think that I wasn't cut out to be somebody starting companies.
Hmm.
I mean, and I started my own company, my own venture capital company, but it wasn't a
Yeah.
high growth company. I wasn't trying to build it into $1 billion company. I was just trying to do the job. It's like I started a dry cleaner.
Okay.
So, I did what I could. That's what I did.
So like, I would like to expand about some of the things you kind of touched on in our conversations. You said that you found out, and I might be using a little different terminology. If you don't agree, please check. You kind of discovered you're a better capital allocator than a manager. That's kind of what I hear you saying.
Yeah. I mean, I actually not only better, but I really disliked managing people
Hmm.
in the sense of
Okay.
like, let's sit down once a week and we'll go through your to-do list and figure out what you did. And, I'll give you pointers and pep talks and that kind of stuff. I really liked talking about ideas. I like talking to founders where I'm not managing them,
Yeah.
where I feel like we're kind of, teammates. We're both trying to move ahead. They're building the company, I'm not, but it was just a different relationship. So I preferred that. Um, and I think I was better at it.
So you and Elizabeth wrote the book Investor Investor versus Investor versus Founder.
Founder
Uh,
versus investor. Yep.
Founder versus, yeah, the right order. Founder versus investor. Um, and you have a very interesting kind of back and forth. And you touched about on it, not directly, but through the conversations. But to follow up on what you just said, what do you think makes a good capital allocator, at least in the world of venture capital? And what do you think makes a good founder in the world of startups?
That doesn't seem like a fair question.
Okay,
I
okay.
mean, that
So so
there's so
so
many things. What is
yeah, okay. So what would make it a fair question?
that's not a fair question either. I don't know. Okay, wait. So let me take a. Sorry. Let me take a sip of coffee.
Yeah.
All right, let me take a swing at it. So, what makes a good venture investor? I think it's hard. Like, there's so many things, right? I mean, it's same. What makes a good entrepreneur? Like, you need to be able to do soup to nuts, right? And a good entrepreneur, obviously, it's a mile wide. You need to be able to
Yeah.
understand the financials. You need to, talk to customers, et cetera. And those are the normal things that make a good business person, right? So you need
Yeah.
all of that. You need to be a good business person. On top of that, I think you need to be flexible enough to change your mind when you're wrong and to realize that you don't actually know what's going to happen, right? Like this is like the uncertainty thing, right? You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know how it's going to play out. And if you pretend you do and you're inflexible, then you're just going to go down some dead end and
Okay.
crash and burn. So you need to be able to say like, okay, I'm not sure what's going to happen. I have a theory of what's going to happen, and I'm
Mhm.
going to pursue that. And when I find out that it's not working or I'm wrong, then I'm going to change my course, right? So I think the ability to walk that line between going full bore down one path, realizing that you may have to change direction at any time, like it's not an easy thing for most people to do, and embracing the fact that you really don't know what's going to happen.
Mhm.
So to me, that's like at the core of it. And I know that's not like a personality trait. It's just a way of thinking. And if you talk to a good entrepreneur, they do think that way. Like it's, right? And you've talked to plenty of entrepreneurs, you could see that they think
Yeah.
this. So I think that's sorry, my dog is trying to get in. I think that's important as for a founder.
So it's in a way, in a way of, and if I'm quoting somebody, I just don't know who. It's like to hold a strong opinions loosely.
Yeah, right. You could say that. Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's more than like opinions, right? It's like a way of being, right?
yeah,
You talk to a good entrepreneur and say like, and they're like, well, here's what's going to happen. And you're like, actually that's wrong because of this. They'll be
yeah,
like, great, then here's what's going to happen. They're not deterred by this, being wrong all the time. This is, I think, it struck me when when I went to the entrepreneur side after investing for a while and becoming a founder that, how wrong I often was.
yeah,
And how little I needed it to bother me very little,
yeah,
So I think that's true on the investor side too. And I think most investors don't get this, right? They're very certain of their opinions. This company is like in the right place. This market's going to be huge, et cetera. But of course, that's not how they run their businesses, right? Like nobody puts all their eggs in one basket. I mean, if you were sure of something, you'd put all your money in it, right? Like you
yeah.
wouldn't. I mean, you're done, right? You found something that was a sure bet. Why spread the bets around? But I do think it's people need to be more conscious of the fact that they can't predict the future.
Yeah.
And if you can't predict the future, then you have to invest somewhat differently than if you think you can, or even if you think you almost can. So there's some humility, I believe, that's probably necessary that a lot of investors don't seem to have.
It was this fascinating book called Being Wrong that I read more than a decade ago. I don't remember who wrote it. And again, I don't remember the whole book. I just remember the key takeaway is that, and what the author made the point is that the emotional state as a human being, when you're wrong and when you're right, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. Not when you discover you're wrong. While you're being wrong and while you're being right, there's no internal emotional valve that changes.
Okay.
And it's actually a very difficult. I mean, of course, when you discover you're wrong, you might go shed, oh my God, or you might be very stoic and you're able to do it. But the state of mind of being wrong on the emotional level, on the human emotional level, and the state of mind of being right on the emotional level is identical. What are you being wrong? And that's why one of the greatest human challenges of being wrong is that it doesn't play into the emotions. It doesn't play into the emotional spectrum. Besides the fact that once you discover you don't want to be wrong, and again, as an entrepreneur myself, I had to be sometimes punched in the face multiple times till I said, oh, maybe there's a possibility that I fucked up and I need to try
Right.
something. So I think this is kind of very interesting segue because you said about this, how difficult it is both for investor and for the entrepreneur to hold strong opinions loosely and to know that it's a life of, uncertainty. And you have a very interesting philosophy that you said of how you approach startup investments and the play and uncertainty versus. So for people who might have not that have sinned and not read your work and your articles, can you explain your philosophy in this aspect?
Sure. Which era are you talking about?
No, uncertainty, the
Doing this
importance
so
of
long.
investing. No, sorry. Again, and this is my understanding, is that you
Yeah.
talked a lot about uncertainty as a necessary component for a successful startup and it's a successful investment in a startup. So if
Yeah.
there's no uncertainty, like why the hell are you investing? In a way, and I'm sure you can explain this better.
Yeah, so this is there's this old idea. There's a guy, Frank Knight, he wrote a book back in like 1921 called Risk, Uncertainty, and Profit. And in it, so the important thing to kind of background here is he makes a distinction between risk and uncertainty. And,
Yeah.
Sort of just in English, those words mean the same thing. But he says, risk is something you can put a statistical distribution around. You can say like, oh, you can have odds, right? 20% chance this is going to work.
Yeah.
Certainty is where you just don't know. You can't really predict even this statistical distribution of outcomes, right? What's the interest rate going to be in, 2050, right? What's the exchange rate for gold? You could say like, oh, well, it's going to be on this distribution, but that's not right. You can't predict it at all. So, and the thing about being able to lay odds is if you can lay odds, then you can insure it. You can insure the outcome, right? People say like they hate risk, but insurance companies, that's all they do, right? They take risk. They don't know when I'm going to die, but they're still willing to sell me life insurance because they can statistically predict, right? They can, if you have 10,000 customers, then you know exactly when people are going to die. But there are some things where you can't. And, Knight says this is what entrepreneurs do is they take uncertainty. It's not that they take risk because everybody takes risk. Google takes risk. Amazon takes risk. Everybody is willing to take risk because they can insure it, even if they're insuring it internally by having many projects. So if you go to your boss at your big company and you say, hey, this is $1 billion market. And he's like, okay, well, how risky? So I'd say, well, there's a 75% chance it's going to do this. he'll be like, okay, we'll do that, because
Yeah.
even if you say there's a 5% chance, if it still pays off, they're willing to do it.
Yeah.
But if you say like, I don't know, then they're going to not want to do it, right? They're like, how big is this market? You say, I don't know. They're going to say, okay, go find out, right? Like, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to, you can't just walk in here and say you don't
Or you're
know.
fired.
You're
Or
right.
you're fired.
Right. So, you think about like, let's take an easy example that everybody knows. When Apple Computer came out with personal computers in the 70s, IBM was the king of computers, right? They were one of the world's largest companies by selling computers. Like, I think they were the world's largest company in like 1971 selling computers. And they looked at this personal computer and they said, I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's going to be that big, like I don't, or we just don't know how big it's going to be. Some people will want it. Some people won't, so they actually didn't enter the market until after Apple Computer went public and had more than $100 million in revenue. It seems late, for
Yeah.
somebody saying like, this is our business. This is our business. We own the computer business, but we're not going to enter this new computer business, even to somebody who has $100 million in revenue, which was a lot back in the 70s, so I think and the reason they didn't was because they couldn't predict it. There was this uncertainty. So when you think about why, one of the questions I always had was what's different between, the startups that I look at, these kind of high growth potential startups and every other company in the world, right? Because especially when I'm teaching entrepreneurship, like what's the difference? What am I teaching? I'm not going to teach these students accounting, right? They can learn that anywhere, or they can learn it from somebody better than me at least. But I want to teach them what the difference is between starting this kind of company and starting any other company in the world. And then the key thing is like, all right, what is it that allows your startup to survive? If you have this amazing idea that's going to grow into $1 billion company, you think,
Yeah.
why isn't Apple doing it or Amazon doing it or Google doing it? Like, why are they letting you do it? Like,
Mhm.
it seems like not a great idea for them to be like, oh, let's let somebody else take this enormous market. And the reason is they're not sure if that market really exists or not. I mean, they
Mhm.
may just completely disbelieve it. Although if they disbelieve it with good reason, you should probably listen as an entrepreneur. The more likely thing is they just don't know. They're like, maybe,
Yeah.
I don't how we can't plan for that. There's no probability we could put on that. So I can't go to my boss and say, hey, let's do this thing they're doing. I mean, if you talk to people at corporate, like the kind of corporate business development people who build things internally,
Yeah.
and you ask them the questions like that, like awkward questions, they'll say these things, right? There was one corporate guy, a business development guy, I introduced him to a startup and they invested in the startup. And after they had invested, I said, I'm interested why you didn't just start this, because given all the data and the technology that you have internally, you could have just turned this on in like a month. Like instead of
Mhm.
investing, $2 million for 20% of the company, you could have just built it yourself for, much less for,
Yeah.
less than they're paying you, the guy who did the deal. And
Yeah.
he's like, yeah, well, I mean, I couldn't convince my bosses to actually build this internally because I mean, I might be wrong, and it's, yeah,
And then I get fired.
yeah. And I don't think that's unusual, right? So this is like this uncertainty, this not knowing the future, right? Like not knowing what's going to happen creates an opening for startups to start. And you can walk through that opening and start your company. And then after you start it and before they realize you can build some sort of moat that protects you from them entering later. So, if if IBM had started building personal computers at the same time Apple Computer did, Apple wouldn't have survived, right? And we know this because there were literally like 50 other companies building personal computers then. And then when IBM introduced their computer, 49 of them went out of business, right? Apple survived because they had gone public. They had a great brand. Their machine was really well designed. It was, so they had built a moat around the product, whereas like TRS-80 had not. Commodore with their, Commodore 20 and the PET computer had not, and they all went out of business, right? So this is the theory. When there's this uncertainty where you don't know what's going to happen, then you can go in as an entrepreneur and not have to compete directly with the incumbents immediately. So you'll have time to build a moat. Now, the problem is, of course, that you don't know if it's going to work or not. And, I mean, I think so. If that theory is true, then what you would predict would happen is pretty much exactly what you see, right? That most startups don't actually succeed, right? And not because they're poorly managed or because they've taken, they've done the wrong thing. It's because, well, the market didn't turn up, the technology didn't
Mm.
actually fit into the system, whatever it is. So this is my theory. You have to find this uncertainty, this thing where there's something about a company that is just not knowable. Not that you don't
Mhm.
know, but it's just not knowable at all. Nobody knows and can't know. And if you can't find that uncertainty, then it's probably not a good investment
Mm.
because, you look at Pebble Watch. Remember the Pebble Watch? You may not remember
Yes.
this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
biggest crowdsourced, crowdfunded
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
product at the time.
Yeah.
They introduced this
Flashbacks.
beautiful.
I'm having flashbacks. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It was beautiful, right? It was a great product. This amazing smartwatch. Nobody else had this smartwatch, and they had the biggest crowdfunding, crowdsourced funding thing ever, etc. They built the product, they shipped it, they were king of the hill for a year or two, and then Apple said, "Hey, we're going to do that," and they did, and then Apple went out of business.
Sorry.
And it's the thing is they didn't have enough time to build a moat. Like when they started, it was an idea that people said, "Yeah, okay, I can see." There's no uncertainty about there being a market here.
Yeah.
Like, there's definitely a market, especially right after the crowdfunding where,
Yeah.
they was so
They
popular.
proved it.
Apple say,
Yeah.
yeah, you're Apple, you're like, okay, I'm going to start, the day after the crowdfunding, you're like, okay, people want this, let's build it. So I think that's my theory. So when I look at companies, I say like, is there something about this company which is not knowable? Is like the market not knowable? What is it? What is it that's not knowable? And there's certain types of unknowability that are more important. Like, if you're kind of like, well, can these people manage this company? Well, I don't know. That kind of, maybe that's you should figure out, right? Is this technology going to work? Well, I don't know. Okay, let's figure that out because those things are knowable. You just
Yeah.
don't know them, right?
Yeah.
Whereas some things are not
You can
knowable.
assess them. You can at least move them to the risk guy. You can move those
Yeah,
sections to risk. You can move those
exactly.
to risk. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So
Yes.
that's my theory of investing. If I look at a company and there's not something about it where I'm like, wow, that's a huge thing, and I don't know the answer, then if I like meet them, I'm like, well, this is a slam dunk. This is 100%. This will clearly work. Then I'm like, no,
Yeah.
I'm not doing that because there's probably another 50 companies just like that, and everybody else is looking at them and saying, yeah, let's do this. This is obvious. And then
So-
if you have 50 competitors, how do you make money?
So I want to kind of recap what you said, and let me make sure that I and the listeners would understand. It's like, and you say like a successful or probabilistically successful startup, a probabilistically successful startup is one that has uncertainty, and that uncertainty buys the time from the big whales, from the big whales or from other competitors to pursue it, and plus the other factor, they actually execute well. They actually quit. They have to execute because they have to, whatever is critical to make this into a successful product / company, to create a moat. But it's like, hey, the British are coming, the Turks are coming, wherever you want to say. So while I have time, I'm building the moat, I'm building the castle, so I can protect when they wake up, when everybody wakes up. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and executing well obviously is a constraint, right? Like everybody has to execute well.
Yeah.
So that's the reason I didn't say that is because, well, all right,
It's
it
a
doesn't
given.
matter what company you're starting. Yeah.
It's a given. Well,
Yeah.
execute well / have some sort of power or some sort of thing that actually helps you kind of survive.
Oh, yeah, totally. Okay. Yeah, you do have to build the moat somehow. Over time, like that's just, and I think a lot of people forget that. Also, a lot of entrepreneurs forget that. They're
Yeah.
like, I've got a great idea. People love it. Customers are like flocking to me. And you say, well, okay, but once you're successful, how are you going to defend that idea from everybody else entering the market? And they just haven't thought of it.
So it's interesting. I tell you what I'm hearing, and I'm hearing is that in a way, it's like if the startup world is a jungle. In a way, a lot of the things you keep saying is that the biggest that like the big companies or the bigger companies are the predators, and in a way, there's two places they would jump at you. They would jump. One, when there's no uncertainty and the market is obvious, like in the watch example that you gave, and then it's like, okay, great, like you really don't have time because somebody's going to they're going to outperform you, outspend you, and just get into the market. And second thing, you did the hard work of taking uncertainty out of the market, out of the technology, out of something, but you didn't spend time to create a network effect or to create a brand or to create whatever mode you think is the difference. And you basically did the work for them, and then they either are able to cut you off, or basically keep you small.
Yes.
Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah, right. I mean, in a way, you can think of at the beginning, uncertainty is the moat, but
Okay.
to succeed, you need to mitigate the
And for good
uncertainty.
reason. And for good reason. It's the most for good reason, right? That's
Yeah.
like that. Yeah.
But you need to get rid of the uncertainty if you're going to succeed, because
Okay.
right at some point you have to be like, okay, we know we're succeeding, we can actually plan the future, and
Yeah.
that's kind of the transition from being a startup to being a real company. But once you've done that, you need to have some other moat. So then you're in the world of just normal business strategy, what they teach in business school.
So I want to put two hats around this. So one is the investor hat, and one I would say I heard I heard the prophet Jerry, and I believe in the coming of his principles, and I'm convinced, right?
Mhm.
And I'm convinced. Now I'm an investor, so let's say like some with investor side. I said my mind is blown. Jerry, you're right. What's the practicality from your experience of executing on that? On
As an investor or as an
yeah,
entrepreneur?
no, first as an investor, and then I'll be happy to move to the entrepreneur side.
Oh, yeah. As an investor, it's easy, right?
It's easy. I mean, the fact is, most people don't do it, right? So it's like,
Well,
why is it easy?
I think most people don't do it because they don't believe it's true.
Okay.
Well, there's that. There's also like, so we talked about being wrong before, right? People don't like to be wrong. If you worked at a big company, I mean, so I worked at big companies for maybe 10 years of my career, and they're some of the biggest companies in America. I had, an executive position at one of them. There was no time that when I worked there that I was wrong, right? Because being wrong is not something that they tolerated.
So you didn't put yourself in a situation you could be wrong. Is that
Well,
what you
that
said?
and also when I actually was wrong, I wasn't wrong, I mean, there's a lot of politics around it. Clearly like not my fault. Like, and in some ways, like part of that wasn't like, slimy was that, look, I did the analysis. You looked at the analysis. My analysis was correct, right? I went through every step of the way to get here, and, we rolled the dice. The dice fell against us. What are you going to do? Right?
Yeah.
Like, that's just the way the world is. But the analysis was sound. So for an analysis to be sound in that world, it has to be a rational step by step. I had made these assumptions. These assumptions are good assumptions. I, put it into the model. The model, played out.
Does it have to be conservative?
It doesn't, I don't think conservative is the right word, but you did have to be rational. So, like one company,
Okay.
when I was at the corporate venture capital, one of my bosses was like, well, do a discounted cash flow analysis of this startup, right?
Okay.
And so I built a 5-year model of the startup, and I put a discount rate, and it showed the exact value I wanted, right? Like this, oh wow, the exact amount, the valuation was exactly what I needed to win the deal in the market, right? So,
Amazing.
which was weird
Amazing.
coincidence, right? I mean, you know how these works. Like you make 100 assumptions, you can tweak them all to get to where
Yeah.
you want. And at one point, the guy caught into it, and he said, "Wow, you've made like 100 assumptions here, and you can defend each of them like 99%. But if you're defending each 99% and there's 100 assumptions, you've got like a 1% chance of being right." And
Yeah.
I was like, "I don't know what you're talking about." I mean, I mean, the truth is like, yeah, that's just how it is. Like your discounted cash flows are worthless in this environment because you can't predict any of this stuff,
Yeah.
right?
Like what's the whack? What is it? What is it?
Well, and that's it. Like, but even the discount rate, like you can't have a discount rate, right? You can't
Yeah,
say
you
like,
can.
right? Because you don't know how much risk you're taking because it's
Ugh.
uncertain, right? So like, it's a pointless exercise. I mean, it's not pointless. It actually helps you think through
It
the
finishes
you're
through,
going
but
to
yeah,
have,
yeah.
but it's not accurate. So I
Yeah.
think, but in a big company, that's the kind of thing they want to be able, if it fails afterwards, say like, look, we did the discounted cash flow. This didn't happen because the management of the company was bad. That kind of thing. And I think as an independent investor outside of a big company, you have to be able to say like, you know what? And I think most investors do, by the way, most venture capitalists will say like, we don't do discounted cash flows. That's ridiculous. That's not going to work. Right. I mean, you try to reduce your assumptions to the minimum so that, you could be like, okay, look, I've made as few assumptions as possible to value this company. And, that's, and therefore I can't be as wrong as I would be if I made more assumptions, right? But I do think, and so I think most investors do this in a sense, right?
Yeah.
They realize they can't predict. I do think the problem is that a lot of investors, the people who are unsuccessful feel like they need to be right, because they still have that attitude of being wrong is somehow morally, reprehensible. And I think if you're really in this world, this startup world, being wrong is okay, right? Like we all know that.
Yeah. I was wrong 5 times today. Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm,
And that's the
that's
ones I counted.
well, but like I teach a class, it's undergrads, and I say, hey, look, I'm going to tell you what I think. I'm going to tell you what I've experienced. I'm going to also tell you some things which are probably true because they're deductive. But for the most part, like, if you think I'm wrong, you should challenge me because, in my life, I'm wrong almost all the time. I'm
Yeah.
wrong. I'm definitely wrong 2/3 of the time. And like, they look at me like, well, then why are you teaching this? It's,
Yeah,
you
but
think of that, right?
isn't that the fallacy of Ivy schools in general? That to get to the Ivy school, you have to be right all the time, a little bit like corporate America, and then you are trained in a certain way together.
Yeah. Yes, it is. And I think, yeah, I mean, I think that's why, there's certainly the East Coast doesn't have that West Coast ethos that, failing at business is not failing at life, right? That if you start a company and you fail, you're still better off than the person who went to work for a big company and succeeded. And that holds people back.
Yeah, it's a bit again, like again, no judgment on my part, because I think it's what you optimize for. If you optimize for status in a way, it's like that's correct.
Well, look,
Right.
I started a company, right? And
Yeah.
despite some initial success, me and my co-founders got pushed out by the board,
Yeah.
like I said already. And so I was pushed out of the company I started. Like, it was somebody took my baby away. Like that's pretty bad, right?
I mean,
And then,
so it's like it's horrible. So I
yeah.
don't know. Like it's many years ago, and you don't seem to be happy about it as you talk about it now.
Well, I mean, well, then the company failed because the new
Yeah.
management totally mismanaged it, and it failed. And the people who we had brought in early on lost their money, who included some of the biggest names in venture capital, right? So, Fred Wilson was in that company, like, Josh Koppelman from First Round
Yeah.
Capital, like believed in us and they lost their money. And I
Yeah.
thought like, here I have just lost money for some of the most important people in my world and been pushed out of my company and I have no job and blah, blah, blah. And what, the next thing that happened was like a week later, somebody from Union Square Ventures called me on the phone and said, "Hey, let's go get lunch." And I was like,
Yeah.
"So you can yell at me?" Like, and he, and we went to lunch and he's like, "So what are you going to do next?" No, I want to know what you're going to do next. And I
Wow.
was like, "Really? Why?" And he like pulled me into a consulting gig at one of his companies. I think that's just, and that's, it was an example to me about how I wanted to do things when I
Yeah.
invested, which is just because it didn't work doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. I mean, in
Yeah.
fact, you learn so much trying to start a company that the next time you're much more likely to succeed,
Yeah.
right? So this is to me like, and I think that's how I mean, my first venture deal after that was with Union Square Ventures and
Wow.
First Round Capital, two of the companies that lost money on me, And I think like understanding that like failure is not failure, like in our world.
And it's very important how you behave. It's
Yes,
very important how you behave, and
totally.
it's like this. But I mean, I do want to go back to original the question, but can took us this. But I think that I think it's as for the entrepreneurial experience, people who have not gone through it don't quite realize how much your ego is kind of intertwined with the company, the idea, and things like that. Even if you're flexible, even if you're willing to change different things, and I can tell you from my experience, when my company, which I ran for more than a decade, kind of ended in the whimper, after venture capital and all of that, that was it's not, it's pretty shitty. It's pretty shitty. And if I even go before that, I had experience where I was with a partner, and we were in the process of fundraising for a venture. And you have one of those meetings, and you walk out, and then you debrief after the meeting. And the person was older than me at the time. And the meeting wasn't bad meeting, like it wasn't like a horrible meeting. You just debrief, and we went, oh, we should have done this, we should have done that. And again, I don't think I was aggressive in any way or form. It was like a conversation like one does. And my partner goes and looks at me, and we're in the middle of a street. What do you want? What do you want? You want me to kill myself? And it was like just like a total sense, and I got a total sense of despair. And it was the first time like, okay, this is not going as well as I thought. And the person was feeling, but his whole identity was crashing it
Yeah.
at the moment. So it is really, really difficult emotionally in the entrepreneurial process.
Oh, totally. And I think that's, it's one thing you look for in entrepreneurs as somebody who can endure that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Because
yeah,
it happens so often. And
yeah,
the other thing is, I often think of my job as an investor as being sort of an unlicensed psychotherapist because I want to, right? I mean, people call me and I tell my founders, like, look, you can call me anytime, day or night. I will pick up the phone. And, the phone would ring at like 2 a.m. sometimes. One of my California founders, who's, a few hours behind me, it would be one of that. It would be him. And my wife would always be like, "Oh, that's X." She'd know when the phone rang who it was, who was calling.
yeah,
And it's just, I think it's, I don't know. I've had founders whose companies failed call me crying, like, and I had to feel like,
yeah.
why? What? I'm not mad at you. Like, we're in this together. I
No, but
mean,
they're mad at themselves. And again, who knows what other people, like you said, around them, right? Because that's also employees might have been, other investors, spouses, things like that. It's part of a journey. It's
no,
like,
totally, totally.
yeah, it's like I know feeling the pain. I think is very, very normal. It's just like the willingness. I always say, like, I always think about like boxers. Again, I don't box personally, but like I always think about like if you box, you would get punched in the face on a regular basis. Like And I'm sure it hurts every time. It doesn't stop hurting getting punched in the face. You just accept that that's part of the job.
You're right.
Part of the job is getting punched in the face. And I think as an entrepreneur, again, I say this intellectually, intellectually, because when I get punched in the face, it's like it doesn't feel good. But it's like, so like after the initial oh shit or whatever, then it goes and you go, okay, yeah, this is my job. My job is to get occasionally punched in the face.
Yeah. And how you react to it. Do you run away
Yeah.
or are you kind of like, all right, I'm going
Okay,
back
okay.
in there, you know?
You don't leave a ring. You don't leave a ring. Yeah. So I want to go back. You said that as an investor, it's easy. Okay. So can you explain how is it easy?
Well, look, you know, any investor sees, you know, thousands of potential companies a year, right? And potential investments. I mean, and
Yeah.
you whittle them down to like the ones that pull out the ones that make no sense whatsoever, like the
Yeah.
perpetual motion machines. And then you whittle it down to the ones that you actually have some expertise in that you can evaluate. You evaluate them, right? In the ways that you can. You call the people who know the founders, blah, blah, blah. You do the due diligence. And then at the end, you're left with a decision. Like some of these companies have some giant blind spot, right? Some unpredictably, some uncertainty, and some of them don't. And the ones that don't are the ones that a lot of investors say, well, these are the ones we should do because we're more sure of this. There's less risk, right? That makes them more valuable. And my theory is that those are the ones you shouldn't do. Even though there's less risk in some ways, the risk of the individual company is not the risk of how well they would do, right? Because this company, you know, you have a machine that can print dollar bills and you can sell them, right? Like that's great. But if you can build a machine, then so can other people, right? It's unless there's some moat to begin with. And if there's a moat to begin with, maybe you should sell the company to somebody who can run your business at a lower cost than you can as a startup, right? You know, you think about like the Google guys, they had a patent on what became, you know, their search engine, right? And they went to Yahoo and Yahoo offered them, I think it was Yahoo, $1 million to buy the patent.
Yeah.
Now, if they knew that patent was actually worth $1 million, like that's the discounted cash flow, and they could price that out, they should have sold it because Google could certainly use that more, you know, it would be worth more than $1 million to Google, or at least more than it was worth to the founders. They didn't believe that. They believed it was worth a lot more. Why did they believe that? It was just belief, right? Like there was no way of predicting. They didn't even know what the revenue model was. So like there was this uncertainty. Like, how does this make money at all? Like, how does this idea make money?
Yeah.
And they believe
there's a fine line between delusion and entrepreneurship, right?
Yes,
a very fine line
that,
between
right?
delusion.
But you know, I mean, you could rationally say, like, in a power law world, there's a small chance this is going to be massively valuable, right? So I should do that.
Yeah.
But if there wasn't that kind of uncertainty, and thus there wasn't a power law, then they should have sold it to Yahoo. So I think you look for that, right? You look for that, you know, people often think like, well, I'm looking for $1 billion markets, which is sort of a shorthand for saying I'm looking for something that's really like not predictable, because you can't predict $1 billion market if it doesn't exist. Like that's silly, right? If you could predict it, somebody would have done it already. I don't know. I think I'm saying the same thing in just different ways now, but I do think as an investor, you can find the ones that fit this criteria and reject the others if you wanted to.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because, okay, let's take famous examples, right? Like you gave the Google ones. You know, Airbnb was couch surfing in the beginning, right? That's my understanding. And Facebook was way before Meta. It was connection between students and in Harvard specifically, right? So it's like, and again, the market was, and they built the market, but it's like from your point of view, when you are in such an early stage, so there might be even pivots that take the company in different way. How do you say this is the uncertainty that I want to take on?
It's not always easy to see. That's fair.
Okay.
Like, so, you know, Facebook, you could say like, what's the uncertainty between Facebook? MySpace was already enormous, right? So the uncertainty certainly wasn't how big the market was. We knew the market was enormous. The uncertainty was what product would people really like, right? And the reason Facebook succeeded was they built a very different product than what MySpace built, right? MySpace, I don't know if you remember MySpace.
And Friendster was crashing all the time, and they dropped the ball.
So they built a product that had just different characteristics, and that turned out to be the one that people liked. But there was no way of predicting that's the one people would like. You could, you know, go out and test and et cetera. But and also they could build a moat very, very quickly, right? Because network effects can build pretty quickly as a moat. So the uncertainty was probably short-lived before people realized, wow, that's what people want. Now, companies like MySpace couldn't really switch over because they already had
because the model was kind of
and other people tried to enter the market, like Google, just entered too late because Facebook had already built this network. So that's one thing. But Now take Uber, right? So Uber famously, like every venture capitalist in the United States who was operating at the time got to see Uber and had a chance at investing in Uber. They must have talked to everybody.
Yeah,
And so almost everybody said no,
yeah,
right? Including me. And the thing that I missed was there wasn't a lot of uncertainty in how big the taxi market was, right?
mm,
I mean, the market size, and it just
yeah,
wasn't big enough to support a company like Uber. The market just wasn't big enough.
yeah,
So if you looked at it as a taxi replacement, then it wasn't a very good investment. But what the uncertainty was not on on the demand side, the market side. The uncertainty was how many drivers could they get to drive? Because in fact, the demand was unlimited.
yeah.
It was supply constrained, not demand constrained. If you looked at it as supply constrained and said, all right, are they going to be able to get drivers to drive for them and thus increase the amount of supply so much that all the demand is fulfilled? Then they could be an enormous
No, that's
company.
fine.
And
Yeah,
that probably wasn't hard to figure out. The hard part was, can they get people to drive for them? And that
yeah.
was the uncertainty. And so
Even
if you
even though
miss
like
that, then you evaluate it.
I have to say, like my personal take on this, and is that what Uber and Lyft and other local competitors across the world do, and I'm saying this as a consumer, is that they actually play in the uncertainty because getting a cab was for you young kids out there was an exercise in uncertainty. Am I going to get a cab? Will it arrive on time? Will it be decent? Like there was so much uncertainty in this action of getting a cab. You want to make it time to the airport, like all those things. It's raining, like all those things. And what Uber has done from a consumer point of view is that made it almost certain. It made it certain. Like my certainty levels of getting a cab, as long as I'm getting a transportation, not a cab, getting a transportation, as long as I'm willing to pay, it becomes almost certain, and that changes the game, and then becomes a certainty market. It's like that.
Yeah, that's kind of falling apart now, but yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
right
yeah.
at the
But,
top.
but it's a fair point. Huh. But can you walk through it, and like again from one of your investments, if you're willing to share, and kind of and how this process played in your thinking?
Yeah, so let's see. Datadog, right? Datadog
Datadog.
turned out very well. I met them when they were really two people and they were going to build the product in New York. And there was a bunch of uncertainties here. Was, can you build the product in New York at the time when there
Hmm.
weren't that many great engineers in New York, or the great engineers were paid a lot by the investment banks and by the people
Yeah.
who could afford to pay them a lot. So could you actually attract them to a startup in New York? That was one
Hmm.
uncertainty. Um, and those that kind of uncertainty you try to mitigate. I asked the founder that question, like, how are you going to hire engineers here? And he had his notebook, popped it open to a page he had bookmarked, and he had like two columns of engineers all the way down the page. He's like, these are people that I know that I think I can convince to join. Not all of them, but
Yeah.
enough of them to get this initial product built. And I was like, okay, that's a lot of engineers.
Yeah. And that was like your uncertainty
It was some mitigation. Now, obviously, I was
mitigation.
still like, I have no idea if you can hire these people or not, if they're going to want to leave to join a startup in New York City in whatever year that was,
Yeah.
2010, before New York City became more of a startup hub. So
But is
2010?
that what was that really the uncertain part for in
No,
the
no,
company?
that was one of
Okay.
them. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
so that was a smaller uncertainty, and I was just using that as, you can actually carve down the
Yeah.
uncertainty in
Yeah.
some ways. The bigger one was, all right, you're really counting on this cloud market to take off, right? It's like
Yeah.
you are, hitching your sled to this cloud market taking off, and it to becoming really ubiquitous, that everybody is
Yeah. Yeah.
outsourcing
Yeah.
their compute to computers they don't own, and not small companies, because small companies weren't really their clients, right? It was
Yeah. Yeah.
big companies, because what their software does, for people don't know, is it pulled together signal from a bunch of different systems that you are using internally and correlated them, so you could say like, oh, something's failing, like, the software response time has gone way down, like the ping time has gone down. And it started going down right at the time somebody committed something to GitHub here. So you could be like, okay, well, these things may be correlated. Let's try to figure it out. So they were pulling together all these different signals into one dashboard that would help you manage the resources you were using across many providers in the cloud. And so the uncertainty here is, well, is that how the world's going to unfold? Is JP Morgan Chase going to be using computers somewhere else
Yeah.
for all their stuff like this,
Which at
or
the time was unthinkable.
I mean, it was, yeah, right.
Yeah. Yeah.
People didn't believe that. A lot of
Yeah.
people thought like that's a temporary phase, and then
Yeah.
they're going to pull everything in house like they used to. And so, I think that was the big one. Like, is this even something people want to do?
Let's move to the entrepreneur side. Hey, like I woke up in the morning and I said I must build a company. What would you say? How should the entrepreneur apply this principle in the pursuit of pain.
Yeah. I think so. This is, I could talk theoretically, but I think practically people come
Yes.
up with an idea for a product they like that they want to use. And what I tell them is, can you make that idea bigger?
Hmm.
And can you make it bigger? Like, and they can. Sometimes they don't want to, right? Because they know the product they want to build will work. They know that people want it, and it's usually kind of a smaller idea, smaller market, or not as profitable. And I said, like, look, there's 168 hours in a week. You're going to be working all of them. You might as well go after a big idea because it doesn't take up more time than a small idea, right? Either
Mhm.
way, you're working 168 hours. So go after a bigger idea, make the idea bigger, make the idea big enough that it makes you nervous, right? And because the reason they get nervous is because they're like, not because they don't think they can do it, although there's always that, but because they think that, like, who knows if this is going to work or not, right? That,
Yeah.
like, it pushes them into embracing some uncertainty if they make the idea bigger. But look, and the way that I usually convince them is I say, look, you aim for the moon, you land on the roof. So, if you have a really big idea and you fail, then you have a medium idea. If you have a small
Yeah.
idea and you fail, you get nothing.
You get that.
So, but I think that's how you do it. And then I think, you have to, well, yeah. So then you have to go back to okay, if it's a really big idea, like, don't fixate on a single plan, right? Now that you have this uncertainty in your plan, you need to embrace the fact that you don't know what's going to happen and be flexible around it.
So are the dangers primarily psychological?
Well, no, I don't, I mean, well, I
All
think
things being equal. Right. All things being equal.
I think the danger is the fact that if you don't know what's going to happen, the bad things might happen, so, like, and that's just unavoidable,
Yeah.
in my scheme of things, like, can you avoid all bad things? No, because you don't know what's going to happen. Some of those things that might happen that you don't know about could be bad, right? Like, it could be that
Yeah.
you build the product and nobody wants it, right? I mean, and then, you obviously try to mitigate that through lean and whatever, but
Yeah.
the fact is, like, you might go down a path and commit yourself to that path. And at some point you need to make irreversible decisions. And then you find out that, hey, we spent money on something that, turned out to be the wrong path. And now we're out of money. So you need to accept the fact that you might not succeed,
Yeah.
or at least not think about it. I guess you don't need to accept it, but it's always there. The, I think, the psychological thing is, can you actually decide that you want to take this uncertainty? And some people can and some people can't. Like, some people just don't like it, right? I mean, my students are engineers. They're at an Ivy League school. And I think a lot of them kind of go through the class, they think about this, and they're like, you know what? I'm going to go work for Google because they can, right?
Because they
And it's
can't
a good
hold
job.
uncertainty. You can't
Yeah.
hold uncertainty in the psyche. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And then some people who are entrepreneurs, start a company and they do it for a little while and they're like, wow, I just don't like this. I
I
know.
don't like getting punched in the face every day.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Well,
So,
it's understandable. It's understandable.
like, of course it is.
I have to say, like, I have these conversations occasionally. It's like, I'm saying, if you don't have to be an entrepreneur for some reason, don't.
Yes.
Don't. It's not more noble than being a very good engineer, doctor, or caretaker, like any other profession that's good in the world. That's good. But it's like, there's something you need to be slightly off for some reason, in my opinion. You need to be either slightly off or slightly obsessed or have some sort of a chip on your shoulder to want to be an entrepreneur. Or don't have a choice, right? Or you don't have a choice, right?
Yes. Or you don't have a choice. Yeah. And I think, like, if you look around, you look at your entrepreneurs, just, or, not the ones that the ones that you don't know, the ones around the world. The one thing they have in common is the thing they have in common the most is that they don't want to work for somebody else, or they can't work for
Yes.
somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very difficult for me. It's
Yeah.
very,
People are
very
cool.
difficult.
Yeah.
I love to work with people. It's very difficult for me to work for somebody,
Yeah.
which is different because in the end you do work, right? And we know this. Like, you work for your investors, you work for an entrepreneur, you work for your investors, you work for your employees, you work for your vendors, you work for your clients, right? In the end you do, but something about the psychological hierarchy is different.
Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
mean, that's the same here, right? Like, I worked for big companies for a while. I was never a good employee. I mean, I had good results, but I think my
Yeah.
bosses were always like, can we get rid of this guy? Like, can we put somebody else in here and get good results also? Like, because he's annoying. I
Annoying
just,
is my superpower. So my next question, and it's because we just can't get away with it nowadays, is your stance on AI, because you just can't get away from the discussion in AI. So you had an article on Colossus, how AI will not make you rich, and you ask, okay, so you reference Perez in the theory there, and you make and you make a lot of claims about, like, the problem is AI, and it's from an investment point of view, right? an investment point of view. So I'll be very happy if you kind of share that.
Yeah. The article talks about, there's these kind of technological waves, right? Like
Yeah,
the
yeah,
information communication technology wave or the industrial revolution. Like there's these waves of technologies that kind
yeah,
of link together. And over the course of this wave, they change society so that they become the standard for how things are done. And you can see this with computers, right? Like
yeah.
when I was a kid, you walked into the bank and wrote yourself a check and they gave you money. Now I think, if my kids, like, the internet goes down and they basically are like, what the hell am I supposed to do with myself? They don't do that anymore. They're actually adults now. So they're a little more
But
self-sufficient.
almost, but
When they were
almost.
younger, it's even us, it's like, we'll be like, oh, hey, we're home tonight. Like, oh, the internet's out. Like, what do we do? Like, oh, light candles. I don't know. It's,
Or live an apartment without a GPS, without a GPS. Like for me, that's like I don't know what to do with it. That's actually one of the things, right? I
yeah.
go to different countries in the world. I do not plan anything. I don't open a map, and I just assume I'm going to get there, right? And that's like I remember the days I would have to stop at gas stations every few miles and get a new map to
Yeah.
buy the command to be able to proceed, between countries in Europe, right? So
No, yeah, totally. We could tell the stories. I mean, I remember meeting a friend in Madrid one year back in like 1990, and we're like, okay, well, let's just meet at this plaza. Like, like you couldn't, there was like no, and we
and you
found each other.
couldn't be late. And that's another thing what people don't understand. You couldn't be late because you can't call somebody and tell them I'm running late because this person crossed the country to meet you.
Yeah,
Right?
totally. Now, of course, I tell my kids these stories. They're like, whatever, Dad. So I'm not going to tell those stories, but it's true, right? The computers have remade society and they're like to make
Yeah.
themselves, and sorry, I'm anthropomorphizing, but our society can't do without them now. And that's just this feature of technological waves. But so the question is, like, these waves tend to peter out at some point because the technology has permeated every aspect of our lives. And at that point, the financial capital says, well, there's no point in investing in this anymore because it's done. The market is saturated. And if I invest in one of these companies, all I'm doing is moving value from one thing to the other. It becomes a zero sum game, which is
Mhm.
not what venture capitalists do, right? They don't do the zero sum game. So at that point, you got to invest in something else.
Yeah.
So, and this is that wave ends, a new wave begins. The question then becomes, is AI part of the information communications technology wave or isn't it? And if it is, then it's not a great place to invest because we're at the end of that wave, right? If it's a new wave, then maybe it is, although, it's kind of early. So the argument I make in the article is that it is part of the information communications technology wave. It's part of the computer revolution. In fact, it's sort of the apotheosis of the computer revolution,
In what
right?
way?
Well, let's go back to the 1950s, 1960s, with Marvin Minsky saying computers someday are going to be able to think. These are thinking machines. Like the whole point behind computers was they could think. The way that the point behind the steam engine was it could create power to replace human and animal labor. Like, so it was saying this steam engine can do some of the work for people and for animals that
Mm.
they used to do, right? And the point behind the computer was this computer can do some of the intellectual labor that humans were doing.
Yeah.
And that started out being like, well, it can add numbers, it can, create, it can plot trajectories for missiles, that kind of stuff. It can do the accounting. It can do some of the labor that's kind of just the intellectual labor that's just not very interesting.
Yeah.
But the idea has always been that it could eventually think like people or to
Yeah.
some extent like people, right? This is what I don't
Yeah.
know. I saw somebody on Twitter being like, nobody asked for this. Like, this is what people have been
No,
asking for the past 50 years, right?
and you all you have to do is even if you wanna. If I always say as an old science fiction
Yeah.
guy, it's like scientists. I like look at Isaac Asimov. Like I always like, go back to him because in a way he was a scientist or people were part of his artist scientists in his era, and a lot of the thinking there it's like okay, this is where technology is going. Right. There's a lot of technology is going. And yeah, it's going to be a thinking machine, right? This is going to be in his book, The Nine Tomorrows. He has a short story where humanity forgets what calculus is because machines do all the calculations. And then they read, after 100 years, they rediscover calculus, right? Kind of thing. It's like the thing. Because, and that was kind of, so yes, that thought always has been there, both in
Yeah.
academia and in the science fiction of technology.
Yeah, right. So this is what I believe. That it's the end of the computer wave. People then have this problem where they're like, well, if it's like this kind of end of the wave, like why is it such a big innovation? And I do believe it's a big innovation, that it will have a big impact. And the answer is, look, there's been big innovations at the end of other waves. And the one I used in that article was shipping containerization, which
Mhm.
happened
Yeah.
really in the 1960s. at the end of the previous wave, like, which was merely like kind of electricity, automobiles, mass production. And it was a huge innovation. I mean, it changed our
Yeah.
lives.
And it's a small thing
Yeah.
on the existing infrastructure changed the world.
Changed everything. And
Changed
that's,
everything.
yeah, but nobody made money from it, right? Like the one guy, the guy who invented it, essentially, he didn't, I mean, obviously you don't invent a big steel box that you put on ships,
Yeah.
but the guy who made it actually happen, who changed these shipping systems so that it was feasible. He made some money because he sold his company in like 1970 or so. I can't remember the exact year now, early in the wave to uh, RJR, the tobacco company.
Yeah.
And they paid a bunch of money, and then it was a really bad investment for them because they overpaid. He made some money from that, and the one person who invested in his company made money. But that's it. Like, I couldn't find anybody else who made a bunch
In
of
any
money.
case, if trillion of value was created, he did not even get a decimal point.
Oh,
of
yeah.
it. Yeah.
No, totally, right? And there was a huge amount of value created, and he got almost none of it. The value went somewhere else. And
Yeah.
this is like clear, right? I mean, like every entrepreneur like doesn't think about it this way probably, but you can create value as an entrepreneur, but you have to capture some of it, right? Like
Yeah.
you need to capture some of it personally, and your company needs to capture some of it by having a moat. There was no moat in shipping containerization.
So
Right.
so let me push back at you. So let's
Okay.
take Google. Let's take Google as an example because we talked about earlier. So it's like clearly Google, right, is part of the same wave. It's part of the same wave. They create, if it was the internet, right? I remember the days like I literally had a phone book. I literally had a phone book with IP, IP addresses, and then we had Mosaic, right? Like if there was those things, and then Google came, and not only they created a market, and they created a whole way, made the internet a lot more accessible to a lot more many people, and therefore like created this flywheel, but they captured the value. So in what way is this different?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's going to happen again. Google's going to capture the value. So, that's why, like, as a early investor, it's hard to invest, right? And I don't mean that nobody gets the value. The value goes somewhere. And I do believe that the big companies, the incumbents, will capture the value. I mean, the shipping lines with shipping containerization, the big ones
They
became
want
much
the value.
bigger,
Yeah,
right?
because they got
Yeah.
more business.
But
Yeah.
the difference was that when Google did it, nobody believed it, right? It was a surprise. And I use the word surprise in the essay because I didn't want to go into the whole uncertainty thing and people would just think I was insane. But it is the same idea, right? They had this uncertainty which kept out other people or kept out the big incumbents from going into their market. And there were big incumbents at the time Google started. Those big incumbents didn't come in, and Google had a chance to build a moat to capture value. But with AI, there's no uncertainty. I mean, there's uncertainty about what will happen, but there's no surprise. Everybody had dove into AI like the day it worked, right? The day that that Google said, hey, we're using this attention with the neural networks and it works. It does things. It's cool. It's crazy. All of a sudden you had a ton of people be like, this is it. This is the next thing. Nobody said, oh, I don't know if that's going to work. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, people do say that, but those aren't business people. So, I think the fact that there's no surprise about it, that so many competitors entered at once means that what's going to happen? Well, startups are going to have a really hard time making any money here. Now, if you're if you're OpenAI, the very first one, then maybe you're in the position of Sealand, who was the
And
first.
they're not really a startup anymore, right? They're a startup that became a humongous company and like probably very, very quickly.
Right. And that's, like Sealand, right? So, but they were a startup when they started, right? Which wasn't that long ago. And they were a company that was built for this.
Yeah.
And they might make money, but I think it's going to be hard for anybody entering now to make money doing AI. Now, using AI to build a different business, I think there's money to be made. But building an AI company, I think, is probably a bad bet at this point.
Because the association that I have in the context that you just mentioned is that let's think of apps like Waze, right?
Yeah.
Apps like Waze. So it's like the fact that there was an infrastructure called the phone, data, mobile data, enables you to create Waze, enabled to create Uber, enabled to create Uber Eats, right? Because the big companies created an infrastructure, and multiple big companies, right? Because it takes Verizon and T-Mobile, and it takes it takes Apple, and it takes Android and Google to create this very sophisticated infrastructure that you take for granted, and then somebody runs on that assembly software. I don't know what's a good analogy. Creates a higher level application that can run. It captures value and creates a billion-dollar company or a multi-billion-dollar company in the case of Uber. Just that.
Yeah. Right. You're moving up the stack. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think with shipping containerization, it was companies like IKEA that captured most of the value
Yes. Yeah.
because their furniture was so easy to, I mean, it became easier for them to grow internationally when they could ship their flat pack furniture with shipping containers, whereas previously they were really just a Scandinavian company. And the guy who started IKEA, Ingvar Kamprad, became really, I think, the richest person in the world. He gave all of his money away,
Yeah.
but he created the biggest fortune, of the time.
And as somebody who was in IKEA yesterday can attest, if you look at the packaging, they're literally fit to be put in a container.
Yeah. Right.
Really, yeah.
I mean, what is the IKEA of AI? Like, I don't know. It's not my
That's the
job.
uncertainty part, right? Here we go back to the uncertainty part.
Yeah. Um, but I think if you're an investor looking at things, you can say, is this the IKEA of AI? Like, could it be? Like, there's a different frame you can look at companies in if you're thinking about it this way versus, I need to be in AI. I need to invest in the next AI company. People send me AI companies all the time. I'm retired from active investing, but people still send me companies, and I'm like, okay, this is a company that's going to use AI to write legal documents. Like, that's a good idea, but you know how many of those companies there are? You know, how are any of you going to make money? Like, really? Like, someday somebody's going to roll them all up, maybe. I don't know. But then
Yeah.
there's not much excess value there. So I think it's just the wrong place to be looking.
So there's a story you tell in the book Founder versus Investor that for some reason kind of got stuck with me, and I want to kind of deconstruct it with you. You mentioned it was when you guys were talking about valuations, and you mentioned a company that got one of your companies that got a $300 million valuation, and you did this exercise where basically said, okay, let's assume this is correct. Let's work it backwards, right? And let's say, here's all the things you need to do to justify this valuation in the next few years. And by the way, you're 6 months behind.
Yeah.
6 months behind, kind of thing. It's like that. That's was kind of a takeaway. So I understand. So I actually don't want to talk about valuations because I think that's not the interesting part. I think it was a lot more interesting part, like this. How does walking backwards work with the principle of uncertainty at this stage of a company?
Well, that company, that was the series. It was like the third round of financing. So
Okay.
there was less uncertainty, but it was not clear whether or not the market was big enough for them to grow to that size. The exercise really was, look, you don't know if you can do this or not. I don't know if you can do this or not. But if you're going to meet this valuation, then that's what you have to do. So you have to gear up as if that market exists and you're going to get there. Because if you don't do that, you're not going to get to this valuation. You're going to be fired. If you do it and the market doesn't exist, well, you're going to go out of business, but you're going to go out of business anyway.
Yeah.
Right. So you have to walk down this path, even if you're not sure about it. And that was the real thing. Like, look, and I think the founder really wasn't sure. The founder was kind of like, well, I don't want to hire those people if they're not going to be able to build this. And I don't know if they can or not. I'm like, well, nobody knows if they can or not.
Yeah.
But if you don't try, then you're certainly not going to get there. Like, right. You have to embrace this uncertainty. And I think, people.
Can they build it? Can I manage it? Can I hire correctly? There was actually a lot of uncertainty broken down there, right?
Yeah, although I think that founder they could hire those people. They could manage them. They knew how to sell. Like, the founder was extremely successful selling themselves, like selling, the product when they went to the customer. And if they could teach that to people they hired, then those people would be successful. And it could be that you hire 100 people to do this and they quickly tap out the market. And then they're like, okay, now we have 100 people who don't have any more customers to sell to. But in that case, you're done anyway, right?
Yeah.
So you have to swing at it, and if you don't, then you're going to fail. And if you do, you might fail, but you might not, right? Like, you just have to take the chance. And I think that's the uncertainty was the part where they were like, well, I don't know if I should do this or not, because maybe it's not going to work. And it's like, yeah, maybe, but you still have to do it.
So, I mean, you're retired from active investing, and you still teach, and you occasionally write, and as we're speaking, you're clearly very passionate about this subject matter. So, like what gets Jerry excited nowadays?
The problem when I was investing, I had investing problems, right? Like, so I would solve my own problems. I'd be like, okay, I have this problem. Like, I don't know the answer to this. I'm going to go find out the answer to this, right? Like, people like this, I wrote stuff about power laws. Like, people talked about power laws all the time. I'm like, yeah, but how can I operationalize this idea about power law in my, portfolio management. And like, well, I can't because there's no detail. So I actually need to go down this path and figure that out if I'm going to use it. And I wrote a couple of things that were pretty popular about that
Yeah.
because nobody else had really gone down the path to operationalize it.
Yeah.
So I had problems that I wanted to solve and I would go solve them. Now that I'm retired, I don't have any problems that are anybody wants to read about. So, I now have this problem of choice where I'm like, what should I write about? Because there's lots of things that interest me, too many things. So I think I've got like 5 or 6 things that I'm in the midst of writing right now, which means that none of them are really happening because, like one day I'll be like, I'm going
You
to,
don't have a gun in your head to your head. That's what
yeah,
you say. You don't
totally.
have a gun in your head.
Yeah. So with Colossus magazine, with that AI essay, I know the guy who founded the magazine. I've been on his podcast, and he emailed me and he said, "Well, what do you think about this?" And I told him what I thought, and he was like, "Great, write 3,000 words on that." And I thought about it for a minute. I'm like, I don't write for other people. I write on my own,
Yeah.
website, and I publish it, and I like the freedom of doing that because I can just write it and I can hit publish and
We already said you don't like working for other people.
yeah.
It's a theme that
Right.
keeps coming
So
up.
there's that. But then I was kind of like, it would be nice to have a deadline in my life at this point.
Okay.
Like, and he gave me a deadline. I'm like, okay. And then I worked on it and I finished it and, I sent it to him. And then of course it took like 3 months for them to actually publish it on the web because that's, that's how things work at publishing companies or media companies. And that was excruciating because the whole time I'm like, okay, I wrote this in like May. And by the time he actually puts it on the web, everything I said is going to happen will have already happened. I'll just look like an idiot because, and to some extent that did happen, but not entirely. So,
Yeah.
if he had waited another like 6 months, I think, everything I predicted will have come true. And then people will be like, well, that wasn't hard. I mean, how,
Yeah.
everybody knows this, so, but yeah, no, I'm working on a bunch of things and I'm still excited by how can entrepreneurs be successful with uncertainty, right? Because
Yeah.
uncertainty is difficult to work with. And that's one thing, one strain. And the other one, the other thing that I'm kind of trying to get back into is how does innovation create prosperity for
Mhm.
society, right? And this is, I think, what initially attracted me to technology was the idea that computers could actually make people's lives better. And
Yeah.
this is what I thought when I was 14 years old. That
You don't,
computers,
and do you still think that?
I think they have.
Yeah.
Not entirely. Like they've made some things worse. But I think overall they've made life better. There's, this kind of like, it's easy when you're 14 to be like, it's all going in one direction, everything, and then you're like, realize, well, that's not really true. you
But
know?
as long as there are humans involved, it's always going to be a bit messy, right? It's always
Yeah,
going to be
totally.
messy.
But I would like to kind of, how do entrepreneurs how can entrepreneurs turn innovations into a, betterments for society? And
Yeah.
that's what I'm going down that path as well.
Yeah. And I think it's an important one because I again, like this is my own opinion, reflection. I think entrepreneurship, and not even technology entrepreneurship, right? It's one of the ultimate expressions of agency as a human being.
Yes.
As human beings, and if you, and it's like, I mean, we talked about it in the context of the Ivy League the Ivy League schools, but like they're like, even if you're not an entrepreneur, like your downside is amazing, right? Your downside is amazing. You're gonna get a great job. You're gonna work at
Oh, yeah.
Google, things like that. If
Mhm.
you are, so one of the people I interviewed in this podcast is my good friend Abigail Ray, and she is originally from Liberia. Entrepreneur, right? She did scrap melting, scrap metals. She has an MA in taxation in the United States, and she's a very high end tax consultant and things like that. And she has a solar company in Liberia that provides like solar infrastructure with the products built in, right? Like the refrigerator with a solar panels built in, the TV with a solar panel to rural Liberia, right?
Yeah.
And they put everything that I have to deal with, like in the Western world of entrepreneurship, to shame, right? Like, it's like, the dirt roads, lack of infrastructure, payment systems, distribution, sales problems, like that. And like, that's really making people's lives better in a significant way. And not only that, she makes individuals into entrepreneurs, right? Because the person that bought the refrigerator now has a mini store, right? Has a mini store. The person who has a TV is now is like the entertainment system, the entertainment center in the village, right? The entertainment system in the village. And the things that I read, it takes somebody from they're waiting for something right, to have like for rating for like whatever reality to give opportunities by giving some even basic too, even like you just like TV with a solar panel, they become entrepreneurs and they control their destiny to some extent. I think that's fascinating on all that spectrum. Not only to get us to Mars, right? Not only the Elon Musk like getting us to Mars, but also like just entrepreneurship on a very small, small scale,
Yeah.
but makes a big difference.
Yeah. Totally agree.
So if it's like one message you want entrepreneurs and would-be entrepreneurs to kind of get through their fixed calls, what would it be?
Embrace the fact that you can't know the future
Yeah,
and that's okay.
and that's okay. Amazing. Jerry, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
And
I enjoyed it too.
again, I hope everybody else will enjoy it also. And also, the gospel according to Jerry would be it's okay. You don't know the future, and that's okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Bye bye.
It's a wrap. This Ageas podcast episode ends here, but you don't. Now, is it crazy to think that you know somebody who'd love this episode? Share it with them, and they'll love you for it.